Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a good holiday. Um, we're at the almost at the tail end of our leftovers, but they seem a little bit never ending. Um, okay, so color relativity. That's what we're focusing on in this assignment. I think it's a pretty cool assignment because it is pretty eye-opening how actually colors do affect one another. And I had an experience where I was painting. I had a small little room in my house, and I have very reddish floors. They're kind of very orangey red wooden floors. And so when I got the swatches from the paint store and I put them up on the wall, but I had a tarp, like a painter's tarp on the floor, like those sort of whitish kind of tarps. And so when I painted the wall, and I was using like kind of like a sort of like a tan color, sort of beigey color. And anyhow, so, I painted the walls, I took the tarp away, and suddenly instead of beige, I had kind of like a lavender wall because like it was kind of like a reddish, like if you imagine this kind of red color was reflecting onto like that beige color. I tried to find a good example online of this situation, but I couldn't find something that really reflected it. But it was that red was reflecting onto the beige wall and turning it lavender, or kind of like a sort of a lavenderish color. It was a really nice color, but it wasn't what I expected. So color relativity, I think, is just has a pretty important place. Even though when we do these exercises here, it does seem a little theoretical, but it is actually happening all the time um, in the world around us. Okay, so let's see. So in this particular assignment, you're using that you're starting with one color and you're trying to create two different colors from it. And this is actually as the video instructions for this assignment, set indicates that you can just really experiment. It's really fun. You can actually just kind of flip through all kinds of colors in your background until you go, oh, that's really different. So you don't actually need to, if you don't want to, apply color theory at all, like the principles we're learning, to get this effect. You can actually just play with it. Whereas with this exercise below, where you're picking two different colors, and the video tutorial talks about, the instructions talks about how to pick the colors. You want them to be similar, but not too similar. Like I think the assignment says it should be an analogous, the hues should be analogous, 2 to 3 colors on the color wheel, and different in hue and saturation. So they're kind of related, but different enough so that this exercise works. For this one, you do have to use color theory in order to get the colors to start matching. I think if you just try to experiment with it until it clicks into place, you could be working on it for a long time. So it's good to work with the principles. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about some of these principles. But okay, so yeah, let's get started and see what's happening. Okay, Cassie, all right, so you're starting here with one color as two. The assignment says for this one to choose a slightly, like a toned out color, which I think you've done here, which is good. Why are we using a toned out color? It's because it, like desaturated colors, so the further you move away from this corner, which is maximum saturation, the weaker a color gets in terms of its like hue, the strength of its hue. So like up here, for example, it's a very strong color because it's very pure. And so having a desaturated color in here helps with having the background, giving the power of the background to change the interior. You want to overpower it basically. And okay, yeah, this looks good. So this is, to me, looks like quite a lot lighter, and this is quite a bit darker. This looks like a little more clear, maybe a little more saturated, and this seems a little bit more dull, but in any case, it's looking good. And then two colors is one, so you've got kind of like a sort of a magenta color and then more of a lavender color, and it looks like this one might be a little more saturated. Maybe this one's a little bit toned out. But in any case, they're different enough, which is the key. This one too, just as a tip for everyone, it also does help that these are desaturated as well, because then you can overpower them. So the same principle applies here. Like these, it's best to use tones for a more powerful effect. Okay, and one of the things I said in my notes, if you may have seen it, is that it really does help if you make your swatches smaller as you look at them, because the bigger they are, the more your eye has to kind of jump back and forth, and I don't think it's as powerful, so it's good to do something like that. But yeah, so I think you did a good job with this. So this one, so if we look at the hue here, the underlying hue, it's in the warm category, isn't it? It's magenta. And so by putting a very warm color behind it and one that's saturated, not a tone, or less a tone, like a strong color, then you're actually pulling out some of that warm color and making it appear cooler. This is like the ground subtraction principle, which I think is, for this exercise, I find this really very valuable. Like it's one that I think works really well. It's easy to work with. And this one too, you're adding, so this one is a cooler color. So if we look at this one here in the color picker, so it's blue. So if you put a cool color behind it, you will actually help to pull out some of that blue color and make it appear more, sort of more neutral, kind of tones these out. So I think these are looking pretty close, One of the things about this exercise, it's often very hard to make it perfectly the same because our eye will start to pick up differences. So what you're really just trying to do is making it appear closer than these swatches, like, you know what I mean? So like these definitely appear much closer than the original ones. So I think you did a good job here. And in terms of balancing, the other thing I find that for this exercise helps a lot is to balance the values, and I think that they look pretty balanced in here in the sense that they both look the same amount of lightness. Okay, so I think this is good. I don't really think you should make any changes to this. Okay, Gabrielle. Okay, one colors two. I think this is looking really good. This is definitely quite a lot lighter, which is awesome. And it also looks maybe a bit more saturated. And this looks a little bit more muted and quite a bit darker. So that looks really good. So for two colors as one, yeah, these are good colors to choose. So this is kind of a green, a muted green, and a muted, like kind of like a, sort of a teal color. Very good colors to work with. So for your background, what I might suggest here is actually maybe switching these colors so that what you have is behind the green, you put this green, and then behind the blue, you put the blue. Because that will actually, that's the ground. So it looks to me like you just inverted that idea a little, like, but that would be, I think, what that will do is we'll start pulling out those underlying hues in there. Again, like it's ground subtraction, because the blue will look less blue with the blue behind it. And having a nice saturated color, yes, that's a good idea, like making it nice and saturated. You can always experiment with super saturated, see how that works. But that's what I would do here, is switch those. Then when you switch them, you may want to kind of keep playing with see how it goes. I don't know what that will look like, but then you can work on balancing the values. This looks a bit dark and this looks a bit lighter, so just evaluate the values. I always feel like hue and value are the two most important things to focus on in this assignment. And if you get those, then usually the saturation doesn't matter as much. It seems to, fall into line. Okay, so I'll keep working on that a little bit more. Okay, Janae, yeah, no problem handing in assignments early. That's perfectly fine. Yeah, anybody who wants to do that, feel free to do that. It's great if you have like a schedule that you're going to be really busy before a deadline. Okay, one color is two. Yeah, I think this looks pretty good. So this is definitely looking darker and this is looking a little lighter. You could push this maybe a little bit more. One way to push these is to maybe make one side either maybe this side a little darker, this side a little lighter. Changing those values, making them a little bit more, that will definitely make your backgrounds more, a little stronger. I like what's happening with this one here. This one, like you're using, it looks like kind of like, this looks like a sort of a reddish base. Yeah, red. And then you have a complement with green, and it looks like this is a little redder because of that complement. That's an interesting effect. Yeah, so I might just play with those values just a little bit more. For two colors is one. For this one, what you want to do here, so what I see happening here is that you're actually maybe making these colors more different than more similar, and you want to make them look more similar. What happens, I think what's happening here is that these two colors are a little too similar. And what happens when they're too similar is it's actually very hard to make this exercise work because our eye will start actually increasing the difference. So with this one, think about like, let's see what you have here and here. So these are the same hue. You could, if you wanted to, make one like you could push it into the orange. Or up into the green, so you get an analogous, like more of an analogous, that would automatically make it a little different. I like that they're toned, so keep them nice and desaturated. That's the way to go. One thing to do is, like, if you see that there's not a distinct line here, that tells you that these two colors are too similar. Let me see if I can see here. Can you see how there's more of a distinct line here? You definitely, you want to have that, but just kind of work a little bit more on that and then keep experimenting with the bottom after you've changed them. Okay, Bianca. Yeah, interesting. You had more trouble with this one than this one. That's so interesting. Yeah. It's interesting how in this one, it looks like this, first of all, this side looks lighter and this looks darker. And this, I think this one looks a little more, what color, like the underlying hue seems a little different, doesn't it? Like this seems maybe a little cooler. This may be a bit warmer in contrast. Maybe this looks a bit pinker, which would be a bit warmer. And that makes sense, right? Because having that cool color behind there will bring out the warm tones and vice versa. So that looks really good. Two colors is one. Yeah, this looks pretty good too. Yeah, so you've got a green and then a kind of a sort of a teal color here, and it looks like you're using ground subtraction, which is a very powerful way to work with this. So this green is like, I always think it's just leaching out the green in there and making this more neutral, and the blue behind it is pulling out the blue in here and making it appear more green. So it's bringing them closer together. Okay, I think this looks good. I don't think you need to make any changes here. Okay, Ebony. All right. So starting with this one, yes, this looks really good. Here you've got definitely a big change here. This is quite a lot lighter and maybe a bit more saturated in appearance, and this seems more muted and darker. So that looks great. So for this one right here, what I might do here is maybe make these a little bit different. You do have a change here, which is good. So, well, let's just actually take a look here down here, and we'll talk first about this, and then we'll maybe talk a little bit more about the original colors. So for this one, so you essentially have the same hue here. It's the only thing that's different here is the value. So this is a lighter color, and this is a darker value, but it's the same hue right in here, the same magenta. So when you work in the background, if you have the same hue, you want to keep the background the same hue, because as we learned with relativity of hue, the hue itself is going to change the hue inside, right? So if they're different, you're actually changing our perception of these hues. So what you would want to do is you would want to make sure that, this is the same hue, so either choose this hue right in here, this hue right in here, or this magenta, kind of more pinky magenta color, right, for your background. And then the only thing you would be changing would be the value and saturation. Okay, so that's how to keep the hues stable. Then what you want to do is you want to think about value in terms of what can we do to make these colors value appear more similar, right? So what is the lesson we learned in the relativity in color lecture? That's a really great lecture, by the way, in the learning materials, or the learning path, I should say, or also the video instructions covers the same material, is that if you put a darker color behind this, it's going to appear lighter. And we actually don't want this to appear lighter. We want it actually to appear a little darker so it's going to match. So you want to also play with that value. Okay, so that's what I'd work on a little bit more here. If you want to keep these the same, then I would just keep talking, doing what you did here. If you get them to match, maybe you want to challenge yourself and make your hues a little bit different. So let's go back in here. The instructions talk about using an analogous color. So what you could do is you could either like take one of these guys and maybe move it over to the red, or maybe move it more this way, so that you also can experiment with that a little bit more. But it's up to you. If you find that just working with the same hue is enough of a challenge, then just do that. Okay, Chris. Yeah, I find that this assignment, I really do, in my tips, I talk about taking a lot of breaks, because I do think that this assignment requires you to kind of like always refresh your vision as you're working with it, because it can really, it's like saying a word over and over again. Sometimes it loses its meaning. I find the same is true like with this one. You look at it over and it gets, your vision gets tired. Okay, so I think this is looking pretty good. So this is lighter and this is appearing a bit darker. What I might try with this one is actually to take, we might even be able to experiment here, I'm not sure, but like to experiment with maybe like a more desaturated version of this. Let's just maybe go in here. I'm going to try to kind of keep it maybe the same value, but okay, well, somewhere in there. Oh, hold on a second. Oops. Sometimes this works. There we go. Okay, so it's the same hue, but now it's desaturated. And can you see now how it's more powerful, the effect? Because just like what we talked about before, a saturated color is very powerful, So even just doing that will make a big difference. So you might want to give that a try. Again, you don't even have to make any other changes except for changing that central one. And for the bottom one, too, I think you did a good job here at choosing the right colors here. So you're choosing kind of like, this is like more of this is a red, and this is, well, actually, I might go for this one. I might actually take this one more into the orange, because right now you have exactly the same, and yet you're changing your background hue. So you want to kind of maybe go into the oranges here for this one, right here. So let's see if I can do that. In here, and now the values are, quite a bit different, so you'd have to fix that. But because you're using ground subtraction back here, so you're pulling the red, the background is red, you're pulling it out of the red, and then now you have orange and you're pulling it out of an orange. That would be the correct way to work with that change. So that's what I'd work on here a little bit more, is changing your hue. And you could also desaturate these colors a little bit more. In addition to turning this one orange, desaturate them so that you're going a little bit further into the tones. Again, it will make it a lot easier to work with your backgrounds, because the backgrounds they'll have more strength to overpower a tone in the center. So I'd keep experimenting with these. Take a look again at the color relativity page in the learning path and the video instructions. I think that, and focus a little bit on the ground subtraction idea, because I think that will really help yours a lot. Again, putting the same hue behind it to make them match. Okay, Sora. Yeah, this is a really interesting and eye-opening exercise. I agree with you. So let's see. So for this first one, I think you are getting maybe a very subtle difference. This to me looks a little more kind of orangey, yellow maybe, and this is maybe a bit cooler. I would keep experimenting with this a little bit more. First of all, I'd start by toning this color out a little bit. so that you get even, so the thing with tints and shades. So we remember tints are anything adding white, and shades are anything adding black. So it's along these two perimeters of the color picker. They're actually considered to be saturated colors, even though they have white in them. I mean, they don't appear as bright because, they're a little lighter than say this, but they are not a tone. And tones where you're creating that desaturated color. So by going, let's say, down here, you are creating a softer, weaker color, which works better, as our instructions talk about. That's a really good choice for this particular color. Then I would keep playing with your background. One way to work with the background is to do what you're doing, which is make the hues different, which is really good. And you might even experiment a little bit more. Sometimes, like, for example, taking this side maybe a bit darker, having one side darker and one side lighter can really make a powerful difference in making these swatches appear a bit different. So I keep experimenting with them. So for this one right here, it looks like you have the same situation with ebony, which is you're working with the same hue. So for this, let's just start with that. And then if you want to take it to the next level as you work on this, I would recommend making these hues different, these swatches different, just to the analogous point. So that's like, analogous would mean not too different, but like maybe a little bit here or a little bit here, so you get a little bit of a different hue happening. So for this one, just like with ebony, you want to, I think it was with ebony, I'm not quite sure now, but you want to make sure that if you're going to just work with the same hue, you don't want to be changing these background colors to different hues, because then again, you're making, like this side here, the hue itself is starting to appear maybe a bit oranger or a bit warmer. And then this hue is a bit cooler. Like, so these changes in hue are also important. So you'd want to stick with the same hue. So if this is the color you use on this side, you'd use exactly the same color on the other side, just experimenting with the hue and saturation to make a change. Okay, so that's what you want to do there. I would keep experimenting a little bit more with making this side a little darker. It's maybe gotten a little light, so maybe you want to lighten this blue a little bit so that it doesn't appear so dark. Okay? All right, so again, match these hues, either use orange. It really actually doesn't matter what hue you use as long as they're the same. So like you could use the orange or on both sides, or you could use the blue on both sides. All right. Again, just to summarize too, you could work on these set of colors as you have them, or if you feel confident after you've worked on them a while, change one of the hues to an analogous. Okay, Deidreona. All right, so you have here a kind of a nice sort of lime yellow, and it looks like you're working with the same, like pretty similar hue behind it, which is making it appear a little less strong. And then you're also working here with a very dark background, which makes it appear a bit lighter, which is good. So I would say for this one, the only thing I might change is it's a little hard, because these two hues are so similar. It's a little hard to actually see the rectangle in the middle. So I think the effect is getting a bit lost. So you might want to just experiment with that. You could sort of stay pretty close to what you have, but kind of move this around and see, like, does that? Let's just check that out and see, just adding. I always forget to close the color picker. So there we go. So now just a small change, and suddenly now we can actually see this rectangle, and now suddenly it's just easier to see the change. So just something small. Now look how dramatic that looks now. We really can see that difference. So for two colors as one, it looks like you have a color that it's very subtle change. You want to make similar colors, you want to make them a little bit different. Otherwise, we're really not going to see how you've manipulated the background to change them if you have such a small change. So so many ways to change this, or whatever you want. You could change the hue, which I'm always recommending, so you get an analogous. So just do that. Like, for example, let's go here and then put that in. Oops. So they're actually, it's so similar that Photoshop is actually seeing it as the same color, so I'm not able to um, use the eyedropper. Let's just do that. So even that, change will be better. It's still, you still could maybe play with the value and saturation a little bit more, but that'll start making this exercise work a little bit better. And anyhow, um, okay, so then once you've got those changed, you're just going to add that in there, and then just keep experimenting with it. I think I must have just, I chose this pink because well, let's actually add it into the center here. Okay, so you can see that because you already had this very saturated pink color behind it, it's actually pulling out some of that pink hue and starting to match it. And so in this color right here, what you might want to do is experiment with um, a bluer color to pull out some more of that blue, maybe, instead of this really dark purple. So yeah, so I would keep experimenting with this. Maybe you don't like this color, that I chose, and choose something else. Just kind of keep them a little bit more different. And again, take a look at the color relativity page in the learning path, and also the video instructions, just to review these concepts. I personally always find I need to review them when I work with this milestone, because I think that they're a little bit confusing. So yeah, keep working on this a little bit more.